I didn't realize this until it was too late, until the things hiding in the dark corners of my new apartment began to make themselves known. When I moved into my new place, I never imagined my first week would be filled with sheer terror. Had just landed a job in a small town, and with the limited rental options, I settled for a cheap one-bedroom unit in an aging apartment complex. The building had seen better days, peeling wallpaper, creaky wooden floors, and a musty odor that clung to the air no matter how much I cleaned. But the rent was low, and I needed a place fast. That should have been my first warning. The landlord, an old man with sunken eyes and a too-wide smile, seemed almost eager to hand over the keys. "Not many people stay long," he had said, his fingers tapping against the counter. When I asked why, he simply shrugged. "Guess they don't like the quiet." I didn't think much of it at the time. The first night was uneventful, aside from the strange noises in the walls, scratching, tapping, and what sounded like faint movement. I convinced myself it was just an old building settling, or maybe rats. The second night, the noises changed. I was lying in bed half asleep when I heard it. Slow, deliberate breathing. Not the scurrying of rodents, not the rustling of old pipes, but something alive. Inhale, exhale, deep, measured, deliberate. It was coming from the vent. I sat up, my pulse quickening. I tried to shake off the fear, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. It had to be the wind, the old ventilation system, something logical. But by the third night, the breathing had grown louder and closer. That night, I woke at exactly 2:13 am. My room deathly silent. Then a whisper, just below the vent near my bed. I didn't catch the words, but the sound was unmistakable. It was someone speaking. My breath caught in my throat. My skin prickled with the kind of fear that roots you in place. Slowly I turned toward the vent, my heart pounding against my ribs. The whispering stopped, but something else was there. Two wide, unblinking eyes stared at me from behind the vent. I froze. The eyes didn't move. They didn't blink. They just watched me. I bolted upright, my hands fumbling for my phone. My fingers trembled as I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the vent. The slats reflected the light back at me, empty. The eyes were gone. I wanted to believe. I had imagined it, that my sleep-deprived brain was seeing things in the dark. But my gut told me otherwise. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone in my apartment." The dispatcher told me to stay put, but there was no way in hell I was staying. I grabbed my keys and ran outside, standing in the freezing night air until the cops arrived. When they searched my apartment, they found exactly what I had feared the most. The vent cover was loose. Beyond it, nestled within the walls of my apartment, was a crawl space. Inside, they found signs of someone living there. Blankets, food wrappers, and a knife. But the person? Gone. The police searched the entire building but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no clues as to where he had gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I broke my lease the next morning and never looked back. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can still hear that breathing. Soft, deliberate, right behind me. When my fiancée, Clara, and I found a beautiful rental house at an unbelievable price, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. It was a charming Victorian home on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees and far enough from the main road to feel private. The owner, a quiet, pale man in his 60s, seemed eager to rent it out. He barely asked us any questions before handing over the keys. That should have been our first warning. The house had been on the market for years, though we didn't know that at the time. It had that old house charm. High ceilings, wooden floors, and antique fixtures. The air inside was slightly stale, like it hadn't been lived in for a while. But that wasn't surprising for a house this old. The first few days were normal, unpacking, decorating, and settling in. Clara was in love with the place, always, humming while arranging furniture or admiring the old architecture. But something about the house unsettled me. At first, it was just little things. A door that we swore we had closed would be open in the morning. The lights in the hallway flickered. Randomly, even though the wiring had supposedly been checked, our phones would randomly lose signal inside, only to work perfectly the moment we stepped outside. By the end of the first week, the noises started. At night, I'd hear faint knocking sounds, sometimes from the attic, sometimes from inside the walls. At first, I blamed the house settling or rodents, but Clara heard it too. One night, she shook me awake at 2 a.m., her eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. A slow, rhythmic knocking. Not frantic, not random, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the wall behind our bed. I turned on the lamp, my skin crawling. The knocking stopped immediately. The next morning, I checked the attic, expecting to find signs of animals. But it was empty. Just old furniture, dust, and a damp, musty smell that made my head ache. Then Clara found the photographs. She was cleaning out an old storage room when she uncovered a box filled with Polaroid pictures. They were all of the same thing, the house. Every room, every corner, captured from different angles. At first, I thought it was just an old record of renovations, but then I looked closer. In every single photo, no matter what part of the house it showed, there was always the same figure. A man, sometimes standing in a doorway, sometimes just barely visible in the shadows, always facing the camera. His face was never clear, either blurred or obscured by shadows, but he was there. Then we reached the last few pictures. They weren't old. They were of our furniture, our couch, our kitchen, our bed. The realization hit us at the same time. These photos weren't from before we moved in. Someone had been in our house. That night, I set up my phone to record the living room while we slept. I placed it on a shelf facing the hallway. At 3:13 a.m., the phone recorded something, a figure emerging from the darkness of the hallway. It stood there for a long time, just standing, watching. Then, it moved. Not toward us, but toward the... Louis had pressed its hand against it and, this is what makes my skin crawl, it disappeared into the wall. We left that morning. We didn't pack. We didn't try to understand. We just left. But it wasn't over. We found a motel for the night, too shaken to think clearly. Clara barely spoke, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of coffee. "I felt something," she finally said. I turned to her, confused. In the house, every night. It felt like we weren't alone. Her voice broke. Like something was watching me. I couldn't argue. I had felt it too. The next day, we returned with the police. They searched every inch of the house but found no sign of forced entry, no secret passages, nothing. The walls were solid, no crawl spaces, no hidden rooms. But the photographs? They were still there, and there was a new one on top of the pile. A picture of us taken from inside the house, just before we left. The police had no explanation. The landlord never answered our calls, and when we tried to contact him in person, we found the office abandoned. No records of the man existed. It was as if he had never existed. A week later, out of morbid curiosity, I checked online for any history of the house. That's when I found the old news article. Family disappears without a trace in historic home. It was from 1985, AY. Couple had moved into the house and vanished within a month. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. Their belongings were left behind. Just like us. The house had stood empty for years after that. Tenants came and went, each staying no more than a few weeks. No one ever gave a reason. We never went back. But sometimes late at night, I wonder, if we had stayed just one more night, would we have disappeared too?